The United States government doesn't just owe money. It is buried under it. $37 trillion in debt. More than any empire in recorded history. More than the entire world produced in a single year just 20 years ago. And here's the sentence you will never hear in a White House press conference. They are not planning to pay it back. They are planning to make it disappear. Not by defaulting and admitting failure. Not by brutal austerity that would cost elections. Not by openly doubling your taxes. The escape hatch is quieter, more surgical, and far more dangerous. Devaluation, a slow calculated theft of purchasing power from everyone holding dollars. On paper, the number $37 trillion stays. In reality, the value of that $37 trillion dissolves, and the mechanism they're preparing to use isn't some obscure derivative. It's something you've been told is outside the system. Something people call freedom money or sound money. Crypto and gold. Behind the noise of politics and price charts, you are watching the U.S. government assemble the most sophisticated debt erasure machine ever attempted, building a parallel financial balance sheet anchored in Bitcoin and gold, accumulating these assets quietly, under the label strategic reserves, preparing to revalue them at many times today's prices, and using that revaluation to technically offset a mountain of debt that can never be repaid in honest dollars on a spreadsheet. The government suddenly looks stronger. In your life, everything gets more expensive, because when they push gold and Bitcoin up, they are, by definition, pushing the dollar down. Every dollar in your wallet, every dollar in your bank account, every dollar in your retirement fund, all quietly repriced, without your consent. You're about to be robbed legally, silently, and almost completely. Most people will never see this as theft. They'll feel it as inflation, as higher cost of living, as things just aren't affordable anymore. By the time they understand what happened, the reset will be finished. In this video, we're not going to float vague theories. We're going to walk through the mechanics, how strategic reserve revaluation actually erases debt. The precedent, how the US already pulled this off once before using gold. The present, executive orders, Bitcoin seizures, gold accounting tricks the timeline. Why this points to a reset window around 2026 to 2027, the survival plan, what to hold, what to avoid, and what to build before the switch is flipped to understand the future. You first have to understand one idea almost nobody gets right. Government debt is nothing like household debt. When you owe money, the rules are brutal and simple. Work more, sell assets, cut spending, or default and live with the consequences. You can't redefine the value of your paycheck. You can't declare that your mortgage will now be repaid in weaker units. But a government that controls the currency can redefine what a dollar is worth, reprice the assets it already owns, let inflation quietly shred the real value of what it owes, claim it honored every obligation, while creditors are paid back in diluted money. That process has a name: monetary reset. It sounds abstract, almost technical. In reality, it's brutal, and it has happened again and again. When empires reach debt levels they cannot service, when growth stalls, when taxes can't be raised without revolt, when default would expose the system as broken. In those moments, governments don't change their debts, they change the meaning of the money those debts are written in. America has done this before. Not in ancient history, not in obscure textbooks. In 1933, in the middle of the Great Depression, the U.S. government used gold to rewrite reality, to shrink its debt burden by double digits and push the cost onto savers who trusted the system. Today, the same nation is preparing to do it again. This time with Bitcoin and gold together, at a much larger scale, in a much more fragile global economy, with you, your savings, and your future on the other side of the equation. To see the pattern clearly, we have to step back into that earlier crisis, to the moment when one executive order turned private gold into state wealth, and turned ordinary Americans into the unwitting creditors of a silent reset. To understand how today's $37 trillion problem gets solved, we have to go back to the last time Washington was cornered. Not by China, not by Wall Street, by math. The year is 1933. The United States is suffocating under leftover debts from World War I, a collapsed economy in the Great Depression, a debt-to-GDP ratio rising toward 40% and climbing, bank runs, mass unemployment, collapsing prices. The problem wasn't just that the government owed money. The deeper problem was that the money itself was too rigid. Back then, the dollar was chained to gold. For more than 50 years, 1 ounce of gold equals $20.67. The dollar was legally defined as 20.67 of an ounce. Your paper bills were claims on physical gold, not just ink and faith. This was the classical gold standard. It made currencies honest and governments trapped. Because with a hard gold peg, you can't print freely, you can't inflate away debt. Deflation makes tax revenues collapse. But debts stay fixed. By 1933, Washington was in a vice, too indebted to pay at honest gold values, too bound by the gold standard to inflate, too afraid of default to tell the truth. So Franklin D. Roosevelt did something that, at the time, felt unthinkable. He didn't change the debt. He changed the definition of money. The Executive Order 6102, Legal Theft in Polite Language, in April 1933. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102 in calm, legal phrasing. It said, private ownership of most monetary gold was now illegal. Americans had to turn in their gold to the government. They would be paid $20.67 per ounce. The official price refused, and you faced fines or even prison. Millions complied. Families walked into banks holding coins that had been real money for generations, and walked out with paper dollars instead. On the surface, nothing had changed. The price of gold was still $20.67. The dollar still looked the same. Normal life continued. But one crucial thing was now different. The gold sat in government vaults. The paper claims sat in citizens' pockets. Only after that transfer was complete did Roosevelt reveal the real move. The revaluation, gold $235. Reality rewritten in 1934. The U.S. government changed the official price of gold from $20.67 per ounce to $35 per ounce. That's a 69% devaluation of the dollar against gold, executed by decree. Let's follow the numbers. Before revaluation, U.S. gold reserves were worth around $4 billion at $20.67 after revaluation. The same metal was worth about $6.9 billion at $35. No new mines, no extra work, no productivity, just a new price. And suddenly, $2.8 billion in fresh value appeared on the government's balance sheet. But the government's debts, those were still denominated in dollars, not ounces. By making gold more expensive in dollars, the real burden of dollar-denominated debt dropped. The government's assets, gold inflated. The government's liabilities, debt became easier to bear, in real terms, over the next 5 years, with inflation doing quiet work in the background. The debt-to-GDP ratio fell from around 40% to roughly 25%. The U.S. hadn't honestly paid down the debt. It had diluted it. Who took the hit? The answer is simple. The people who trusted the system. Savers holding dollars, citizens who turned in gold at $20.67. Workers paid in fixed wages. They had their strong money swapped for weak paper. Then watched from the sidelines as gold was revalued to $35. Prices gradually rose. The purchasing power of their savings shrank by roughly 40% over the decade. They were never told, we're using your savings to fix the national balance sheet. But that's exactly what happened. The winners, the U.S. government, whose debt burden shrank, the Federal Reserve, which gained flexibility to inflate the banking system, which avoided mass default. This wasn't a glitch in the system. It was the system. Change the price of the anchor asset. Let inflation chew through the debt. Tell the public you saved the economy. In 1933, the anchor was gold. In the 2020s, the anchors are about to be gold and Bitcoin together, at a scale that makes 1933 look like a test run. Because if you think today's $37 trillion problem can be fixed by taxes, spending cuts, or growth, you're missing the same thing people missed almost a century ago. When the numbers get this big, governments don't change their debts. They change their money. And right now, with debt at 132% of GDP, interest payments heading toward $1.8 trillion a year, and traditional options exhausted, the U.S. is preparing to use the same playbook, upgraded for the digital age. Next, we move from 1933 to the present. Why $37 trillion cannot be repaid honestly. Why money printing alone would cause open panic, and why the reset this time needs new tools. Bitcoin for the future. Gold for the past. The debt wall. Why America cannot repay $37 trillion honestly. To understand why the U.S. is preparing a new monetary reset, you have to understand a brutal truth. There is no mathematical path where America pays its debt in honest dollars. Not next decade, not ever. This isn't political, it's arithmetic. Right now, US debt, $37 trillion, debt to GDP, 132% annual interest bill, $1.2 trillion. Projected interest by 2027, $1.8 trillion interest as percent of GDP by 2027, 6 to 7%. For context, 6 to 7% of GDP is more than the entire budgets of Medicaid, Veterans Affairs, and education combined. It's more than the defense budget in some years. It's larger than the GDP of most countries on Earth. This is not sustainable, and everyone inside the system knows it. The Congressional Budget Office, the White House, the Federal Reserve, Wall Street, every serious economist who has seen a sovereign balance sheet, when interest alone consumes trillions. You cannot tax your way out. You cannot grow your way out. You cannot cut enough spending. You cannot default without ending the dollar's global status. There is only one path left, and it's the same one every over-indebted empire eventually walks. Devalue the currency that the debt is written in. But here's the problem. In 2025, if the government printed money the old-fashioned way, the way Argentina did, the way Venezuela did, the way 1970s America did, the result would be immediate, exploding inflation, bond market revolt, capital flight, loss of global confidence, currency crisis. The dollar is too important, too visible, too central to global trade to simply dilute in broad daylight. A more sophisticated mechanism is required. Something that looks legitimate. Something that looks like policy reform. Something that looks patriotic, strategic, innovative. And that mechanism is a strategic Bitcoin reserve, a gold revaluation window, a coordinated repricing of hard assets, with the U.S. government holding massive quantities before the revaluation is announced. Sound familiar? It should. It's exactly what happened with gold in 1933, 1934. Only now, the scale is 50 times larger, and the assets involved are more volatile, more global, and more politically convenient. The Bitcoin move, not about technology, about debt. On January 23, 2025, the U.S. government made its first overt move, executive order, establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve. The official explanation was predictable: innovation leadership competing with China national security, supporting digital assets. But beneath the press-friendly language lies the real purpose: to quietly accumulate Bitcoin before a planned revaluation. Right now, the U.S. government already holds approximately 210,000 BTC seized from Silk Road, Bitfinex, hackers, ransomware groups, and IRS enforcement actions worth roughly $21 billion at $100,000 per coin. This is the seed. But the goal is far larger: acquire 1 million BTC over 5 years. Senator Cynthia Lummis introduced the legislation that authorizes it. Both political parties expressed interest. Why? Because both parties know $37 trillion isn't repayable. Bitcoin becomes a tool, not a currency, not an ideology, a tool for balance sheet repair. But here's the key: the U.S. is not buying Bitcoin on the open market. They can't. It would send BTC to $500,000 instantly. Instead, they seize it, they accept it in fines, they mine it. They accumulate it quietly through intermediaries. They let other entities buy it for them via strategic custody arrangements. They avoid public reporting while they build the reserve. This is the accumulation phase. The same thing Roosevelt did when he confiscated gold at $20.67, only to revalue it to $35 after the vaults were full. The moment of revaluation: imagine this scenario in 2027. The U.S. government holds 1 million BTC acquired at an average cost around $120,000. Total cost, $120 billion. Then, in a press conference framed as a strategic modernization of reserves, the Treasury announces, for balance sheet purposes, the U.S. now values Bitcoin at $1 million per coin. Not market value, reserve value, a crucial distinction. Suddenly, 1 million BTC times $1 million equals $1 trillion. A balance sheet gain of $880 billion created from thin air, but justified through accounting standards the government itself defines. And here's the magic. Once the U.S. sets the floor, once the world's largest sovereign wealth machine says, Bitcoin is worth $1 million for reserve purposes, markets follow. Global investors will chase the new anchor. BTC rises to $300,000, then $500,000, then $800,000, eventually converging toward the official reserve valuation. Just like gold rose toward $35 after 1934, and as Bitcoin rises, the dollar falls. A rising hard asset equals a shrinking currency denominator. This is how you erase trillions without ever telling the public you're doing it. But Bitcoin alone, ISNT, enough Bitcoin fixes the future. Gold resets the past. This is why the U.S. needs both. Because gold is already institutional, globally accepted, held by central banks, deeply liquid, not politically polarizing, not technologically misunderstood, and already sits on the U.S. balance sheet. But here's the part almost nobody knows. The U.S. values its gold at $42.22 per ounce, not $2,800, $42.22. This accounting trick is not an accident. It is a reset lever waiting to be pulled. What happens when they pull it? We'll explore that next. The gold revaluation, the global domino effect, and why a single Treasury announcement could rewrite $5 trillion of value overnight. The gold trigger, how a single revaluation erases trillions. To see the next phase of the reset, we must shift from Bitcoin, the government's future asset, to gold, the government's historical asset. Because while Bitcoin is emerging, gold is already embedded in the architecture of global finance. For 5,000 years, gold has served as a store of value, a hedge against political chaos, a shield against currency collapse, a tool for sovereign resets, and unlike Bitcoin, gold sits very comfortably inside the machinery of government power. That's why the U.S. needs both. Bitcoin for digital era legitimacy, gold for traditional institutional cover, and the gold play is even more explosive. The secret price, $42.22 per ounce. Here's the part nobody talks about. On the government's official books, the U.S. values its gold at $42.22 per ounce, not $2,800. The actual market price, not even $300 or $500. but $42.22, a number set in 1973 and never updated. Let's follow the math. U.S. gold reserves, 261 million ounces. Book value, 261 million times $42.22 approximately equals $11 billion. Market value, 261 million times $2,800 approximately equals $731 billion. The U.S. is sitting on $731 billion of gold, but officially lists it as $11 billion. Why would the world's most powerful government intentionally undervalue one of its most important assets by 98.5%? Simple. To preserve the reset button. A lever they can pull whenever the debt becomes unmanageable. That moment is now. The 2027 gold revaluation scenario. Imagine this. The U.S. faces a fiscal crisis in 2027. Bond markets tremble. A debt ceiling standoff rattles global investors. Treasury yields spike. Public confidence in the dollar wavers. Then the Treasury Secretary steps to the podium and delivers a historic announcement. To restore stability and strengthen the dollar, we are returning to a partially gold-backed model, effective immediately. The United States will value its gold reserves at $20,000 per ounce for strategic purposes. That number isn't random. It's the one that makes the math work. Let's do it. 261 million ounces times $20,000 equals $5.22 trillion overnight. Without mining a single new ounce, the U.S. balance sheet gains over $5 trillion, the largest accounting gain in human history. No taxes, no cuts, no recession, no political sacrifice. Just a new price tag. The consequences, who loses, who survives. And the final choice, if you followed the logic until now, you already see the shape of the endgame. But this part, the part almost no government, economist, or news outlet will ever explain, is the human cost. Because monetary resets aren't abstract. They don't happen in spreadsheets. They happen in homes, grocery stores, paychecks, savings accounts, and futures. This is the chapter where history stops feeling like economics and starts feeling like survival. The first casualty. The middle class, when a currency loses 70% of its purchasing power in a compressed period. The wealthy barely notice. They own assets. Assets adjust. Assets reprice. Assets outpace inflation. But the middle class, they live on wages. And wages move slowly, painfully slowly, compared to inflation. History shows the pattern. In 1920s Germany, wages lagged inflation by 6 to 12 months. In 1980s Argentina, wages lagged by 10 to 14 months. In modern Venezuela, wages lagged by years. The result is predictable, universal, brutal. Your cost of living doubles before your income adjusts. Your savings collapse before you realize what happened. Your lifestyle evaporates while politicians celebrate recovery. People lose cars. People lose homes. People lose retirement plans. People lose decades of stability in a single political cycle. This isn't theory. This is precedent. The second casualty, savers and retirees. Savers are the easiest targets in a reset. Why? Because they sit still. They don't move capital fast. They don't monitor global markets. They trust banks and politicians. They assume stability because stability is all they've ever known. But when inflation hits 20 to 40% a year, a $100,000 nest egg becomes $60,000 in real terms, then $40,000, then $25,000. Not because the number changes, but because the meaning of the number collapses. It's wealth erosion disguised as economic adjustment. And retirees. Retirees live on fixed incomes. A fixed income becomes a slow-motion death sentence during a monetary reset. Imagine, groceries double, electricity triples, rent climbs 50%, medication costs explode, but your retirement check increases 2%. A reset is not a financial event for retirees, it is a humanitarian crisis. The third casualty, bondholders and pensions. Treasury bonds are often called the safest asset in the world, but that phrase only refers to nominal repayment. The promise that the government will pay the number printed on the bond. What they don't promise is the value of that number. If the dollar loses 70% of its purchasing power, bondholders lose 70% in real terms. This includes pension funds, insurance companies, university endowments, state retirement systems, corporate retirement plans, and millions of workers who never asked to be exposed. Your pension could get paid in full and still be worthless. Historically, this is exactly what happened in Russia in 1998, Argentina in 2001. Greece in 2012, Brazil in 1994, Mexico in 1982. They always protect the state first. Bondholders are the sacrificial lambs. The fourth casualty, renters and small businesses. Renters get crushed next when inflation surges. Landlords raise rents, property taxes go up, maintenance and insurance rise, mortgages adjust, demand increases because fewer can buy homes. Result. Renters face 40 to 80% increases in 2 years. Wages don't keep up. Evictions spike. Homelessness skyrockets. And small businesses die because their costs rise faster than their prices. Their customers' purchasing power collapses. Loans become unpayable. Supply chains become unstable. Inventory becomes too expensive. In every historical reset, small businesses are wiped out first. The reset creates a world where survivors consolidate power. Megacorporations, central banks, governments, multinational elites, everyone else bleeds. The final casualty, the American dream. Every country that experiences a currency reset has the same cultural scar. The dream collapses long before the currency does. People stop believing that hard work produces security, that saving produces stability, that their money is a store of value, that the system is on their side. The psychological damage lasts longer than the economic damage. Look at Japan's lost decades, Argentina's perpetual defaults, Turkey's modern inflation spiral, Britain's 1970s currency crisis. Once trust breaks, it rarely returns. A reset doesn't just destroy wealth, it destroys belief. The winners, the few who saw it coming, and yet, in every reset, there is a small group who not only survive, but rise. Those who convert savings into hard assets, exit bonds early, reduce exposure to fiat, accumulate gold and Bitcoin, hold productive real estate, position globally, build skills that retain value regardless of currency, and refuse to play defense when the world demands offense. These people emerge not with 10% more wealth, but with 10 more relative power. Why? Because when the middle collapses, the gap between the prepared and unprepared becomes a canyon. This is why every empire in history had a moment where a crisis minted a new elite class. 2027 will be no different. The final message, choice here is the truth, no politician will ever say out loud. The US government cannot pay its debt, honestly, so it will pay it dishonestly. The mechanism is gold and Bitcoin revaluation. The cost is your purchasing power. The timeline is already visible. The consequences are unavoidable. But your outcome is not. You have three choices. Ignore it, trust the system, and hope your savings survive inflation. React later, when the reset is already in motion, and watch everything become unaffordable. Act now, position early, hold the assets that governments revalue upward, and protect your family from the storm governments created. History is clear. Empires reset their currencies. People lose wealth. But the ones who prepare early write the next chapter. Gold will be revalued. Bitcoin will be repriced. The dollar will not survive the 2027 reset intact, but you can. The question is simply, will you stand where the inflation hits hardest, or where the value flows next? Your future depends on the answer.